as Robin Williams, Come Inside My Mind, and recently Ariana Grande, Excuse Me, I Love You. What can you tell us about your studies to become such great documentaries cinematographer? Thank you.
Hang on. Hi, thanks for the question. I'm sorry, maybe I didn't understand it quite. What do you want to know exactly? How did I become a cinematographer like this? Or
yes, of course, yes.
Okay, so I started very young. I ran away from school and from home when I was 16 because I knew I wanted to make films. I had somebody from actually the German RAF, which is German's terror organization, the 70s. Somebody in their publicity company, publicity team had an old camera. They gave it to me, and I knew I wanted to make documentaries. And then the person I learned with, he said to me, "You have to edit first." And so I started editing, and I edited about for 10 years documentary features, and then gradually started shooting documentaries. And I think what I need to say is that a lot of my early career was in news, and I traveled a lot for news, like for French European Arte. So that sort of informed a lot of how I see the world, and I've seen a lot and been in many situations, and I think shaped me as a artist and how I observe the world.
Thank you.
Great. Our next question comes from Marvin.
I thoroughly enjoyed watching Boys State. I actually watched it twice. It's very engaging and riveting. I would like to start with a fun question. Upon learning that Barack Obama considered your film as one of his favorite for 2020, what was the state of your heart when you learned that?
Jeff, do you want to get this one?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for pointing that out. I mean, it was about as flattering as it could be personally to have Barack Obama single the film out, and I think it points to the importance and the relevance of what's underneath the entertaining story at this time, which is the fragile state of our democracy, and the Boys State program offering a forum for people to come together and try to cross the divide and find some sort of dialogue that can perhaps spark some sort of productivity. But on a personal level, just the idea of President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama sitting down with their family and watching the film was heartwarming and something that I shared with my family and friends immediately.
Great. Our next question comes from Mabel. Oh, Mabel, you're on mute. Uh-oh. Mabel might be having some technical difficulties. Gerald, if you would like to ask your question.
Yeah, I mean, I was very impressed by the film. I've got a cinematography question and editing question. A good friend of mine, John Feige, is based in Austin and has done a lot of documentary cinematography. He's now teaching at the University of Buffalo. But what I wanted to find out was, how did you negotiate and arrange the different setups in the Texas State Capitol? I've toured it, I'm quite familiar with it. You have some, of course, of the the sessions in the legislative rooms, and then they're all the kind of behind the scenes kinds of things. So I wonder how you negotiated to get the kind of access you needed to get those shots. And on the editing side, I'm just wondering how much footage was shot totally. I don't know, maybe a couple hundred hours. I mean, the kind of access you had, and then how you decided what to include in the final film. I mean, that's always a kind of a state-of-the-art decision to try to pick from all of that different footage. I mean, I remember seeing Jess Moss's earlier film, The Overnighters, at Sundance. So I'm kind of curious about that. So for cinematography, the setups in the state capitol, and for editing, how you chose the images from the total footage that was shot.
Yeah, so how we got the access would be a good question for Jesse and Amanda, but
Yeah.
I know that early on we started talking to the Texas Boys State organization, and they gave us incredible access, which they really embraced us being there. They wanted to be documented, and they received us with open arms. And I know Amanda did a lot of work to make that all happen legally, and then later with the kids.
So that was with the Legion, I guess, right?
That was with the Legion, exactly.
But of course, the Capitol building is where I guess we're all aware that Capitol buildings now could be not the safest place to be.
That's right. That's right. The recent events show that. Yeah. No, but through the organization, we had full access, and there was a whole team from the American Legions down there that would support us and help us with whatever access we needed. And you can see it in the film. The film is what it is because we had this amazing access. We could be on the stage, we could be on the gallery, we could walk around the Capitol. That is something that in real life politics you would never get, right? You would be somewhere far off on a press riser if you get lucky.
I just wondered, did you ask for clearances from the participants?
So that's really a question for Jesse and Amanda. I think all participants had to sign a waiver that sort of was part of the deal with participating, but I don't know exactly the technicalities of how that worked.
Because sometimes it was like private conversations that were in there.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and just sort of talk broadly about how to distill down 300 plus hours of footage, which I think is more hours than there are in the week itself. But Thorsten and his whole team were shooting with multiple cameras, so some of the footage was redundant at times, and that there was coverage of a given scene with multiple cameras, but a lot of them were broken out by following characters. I think in the broadest sense, the decision was driven by our characters and sort of sticking with them. I think they cast a fairly wide net going in, but as the week progressed, our characters emerged and became more and more clear. So we just followed their storyline, which reduced the number of hours on its own to an extent. But there was also a lot of filming done on the sidebar events, like the state Senate material and the other various activities that Thorsten could probably also comment in terms of what was left behind.
Yeah, sort of as a follow-up, did the protagonist kind of emerge out of the editing process? Or did the filmmakers already, okay, we've identified this guy and this guy as key people?
Yeah, well, they identified 3 of the 4 main protagonists going in through extensive background research and following those boys in. That said, they followed a couple other boys as well who didn't progress through the week. So
some people ended up on the cutting room floor.
Invariably, yeah.
Yeah.
You got to bet 90 minutes out of 300 hours, 300 plus hours.
Right.
It's got to fall.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Our next question comes from Gary.
Gerald sort of asked my question, but I want to go a little bit deeper into it. And that is this process of finding the characters before the actual event. How wide a net do you throw? Because, when it's a spelling bee film or any of these various kind of contest films, it's not such a large group of people from spread all over the place. So I'm curious about that pre-planning, and then once there, do some of those people wind up not being as interesting as you hope they would be? And are there people who emerge as you're on the floor that you wind up following? And I realize that some of this is a director's decision, but you guys certainly both were very involved in that.
Right. Gary, I like your background. It looks epic.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so when we finally got the go from the program to participate, we had only, I would say, like 8, maybe 10 weeks until the program started, and Amanda and really mostly Amanda did an amazing job talking to a lot of the participants. It was the first trip. Jesse and I were in Texas, and we would get a call from Amanda. I just spoke to this kid in Houston. You need to talk to them. And then we would drive to Houston. We would meet with that kid. We would interview them and shoot a little bit of their daily lives. And then we would get a call, go to Austin. You have a 5 o'clock with this kid. So it was like, we did a lot of traveling in those 10 days of pre-production and interviewed a lot of kids. And then with that material, we came back and we cut a sizzle, and we sort of liked maybe 10 of the boys and thought they could really be a character and focus in on them. And the second part of your question, then once we were there, we the way we did it was we sort of followed 6 or 7 boys intimately, and we assigned one shooter, one cinematographer to one of the characters. Some of them we had the cinematographer travel back to their hometown. Like we sent Daniel, one of our shooters, back to Steven's house, and he would travel with him back to Austin. And so those 6, sometimes 7 cinemas, sometimes Jesse picked up the camera himself, would essentially never go away. They would meet them in the morning, put a microphone on them, and then stay on them all day. And then throughout the week, as Jeff already mentioned, some of the kids sort of didn't advance, and other characters like Renee emerged, and we shifted gears a little bit. But some of the key characters like Stephen, we filmed with Stephen campaigning long before the event started, and with Robert too. Amanda did, I can't stretch this enough, did an amazing job casting those kids, and then we also got lucky. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Nicole.
Hi, I think a lot of people have touched upon the same thing that my initial questions were about, which is it was an emerging process, as characters are sort of coming forward, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about the sort of pre-casting of, say, 10 of the boys. But was there a character that came kind of as a surprise? I noticed Eddie didn't have a ton of coverage, and yet he won. So I'm interested to know about that process.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'd love for Amanda and Jesse to talk to this too. But Eddie was not on our radar until deep in, and I think once we knew he was probably going far, there was more coverage, but I think we never found him that interesting as a person. There was sort of a complexity missing. And Renee was really the kid that emerged. When we heard him speak for the first time and he was running, we had goosebumps, and he really won over our hearts. And he's a complex human. And so it was a no-brainer that he would, and then he advanced very far. So Renee was certainly one of those, maybe the only real big kid that sort of emerged while we shot.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about just sort of picking up Eddie, and sort of, he's an important character in a way to the plot, but our other characters are really driving the story forward. So he's almost a proxy of Ben, really, as we follow Ben through the Federalist side of the story. I mean, editorially, it was tricky to just sort of figure out how to balance him, sort of give Eddie his due, knowing that we knew in the end that he ultimately wins, which is the trick of sort of telling a story about one of the main protagonists who ends up not winning. But Eddie was sort of tricky to titrate through the footage because we didn't necessarily have a lot of him from the early days. But you need to try to seed the idea that there's someone else out there, just knowing that he's going to emerge. But I think ultimately the priority of the story, really, in the end, with Stephen as the protagonist, is to experience his loss with him rather than, crown the event's winner. It's sort of, the movie is about more than the event itself in that regard.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so interesting that Renee was the one who emerged, because you initially said there were, I think, 3 that you were focusing on, and then a 4th emerged. So yeah, very, very cool. And I love the perspective that you guys chose to tell it from Stephen's vantage.
Yeah, Stephen has a lot of, he has a real quiet strength about him, and a real sort of modest sense of hope and optimism and belief in the system at large. So he's a quiet character, but really a lot underneath the surface, which is unique in politics. It's not the typical voice that emerges.
Great. And our next question comes from Joy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. So a lot of my question has already been asked about how the characters had emerged and how, if they were chosen or not. And Jeff, you kind of touched on the second part of my question a couple times, which was basically what work did you guys do to kind of highlight those 4 individual characters? I mean, Stephen, Rob, Renee, and Ben. Like, what work did you do to show their individuality and their specific personalities? You know, you talked about Stephen having like kind of like a still, quiet personality with a lot beneath the surface. And I think that was shown a lot really well in the film. And I just would like you guys to talk more about how you showed each individual personality.
Well, I think what's one of the strengths of this film, this touches back to Amanda and Jesse doing a great job casting, is that these young men bring a lot to the table on their own, that you know, there's not too much to be embellished, and this isn't sort of a feat of some sort of editorial magic here. This is letting their voices speak for themselves, which serves them well in a public platform like a political event or a political campaign does. I think just letting their voices be heard and letting them be authentic was part of the craft. And I think setting up these interviews that we try to use sparingly, but to give you an inside perspective on what they're thinking amidst all the chaos really helps you get a little bit closer to them. Robert in particular has sort of a coming, like an awakening, a moral awakening throughout the film, and I'm getting to understand their motivations. Maybe Ben has different motivations than Stephen, and just sort of hearing them out and letting them authentically come from the place that they're coming from creates intimacy in the character, and I think their personalities sort of speak for themselves in that way.
Thank you.
And I think this is also in terms of the shooting, with something that I'd love to point out is Amanda and Jesse are filmmakers that don't necessarily seek out to tell a specific story, and they are really good at embracing the reality as it is, and then pick a point of view, pick a point from where you observe, and let it play out, and embrace whatever happens, and let the story guide you. And I think that's partly why this film is so gripping, is because there was no interference by us. We just observed those kids as they navigated this week.
Thank you. You guys did that really well.
I have a follow-up question from Marvin.
These questions are for Thorsten. My first question is, how did you assemble your camera team? And second question, what rules did you have to follow or abide with amongst yourselves in order for you to achieve a similar aesthetic for the film?
Yeah, totally. That was quite a challenge once we understood that what the scope of the event and how many potential characters we have, and also, you know, worrying about missing moments and missing what's happening. We knew that we needed at least 6 to 7 cinematographers, and not only cinematographers or just shooters. There was no way Jesse and Amanda as directors could be at any given moment in any scene anywhere. So we really need the people that understand filmmaking, that are storytellers themselves, and that are experienced in verite. And so I have been part that funded a small group of cinematographers in New York that sort of specialize in really intimate verite filmmaking. And so it's a group of 6 people that where we worked on films together when we needed each other, but we also all worked on especially films that required sort of a self-directed approach where you don't have a director next to you all the time, where you follow really, really intimate moments. And so I knew that the people in my collective, in my DP collective, were able to do that and are very experienced and wonderful, wonderful people. And not only would be able to self-direct, but also had a personality in which they could connect with the subjects. I knew those people, they're warm, they are interested, they know how to anticipate. All these things come in play. And you have to have those qualities in order to connect with your subject, but then also understand, like anticipating what's going to happen next and organizing yourself accordingly. And so those qualities, that's partly why we funded this group, so we could exchange jobs, and when somebody had a scheduling conflict, we could sort of seamlessly call the other and say, listen, I need you to step in. And then there was a sort of peace of mind knowing that if I call one of my fellow collective members, they would step in and they could just pick up, and I could trust them with being respectful with the subjects and understanding all that that I just explained. So I proposed that to Chelsea and Amanda, and they were thrilled. Amanda specifically had worked with Martina before, and they knew of the other members, and that's how we came together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Nicole.
I was noticing different camera techniques, a lot of handheld, and particularly with the speeches, and I felt like it kind of drew me into where I felt like maybe I was almost looking from their lens. And I wondered if there were, certain techniques you could talk about that you utilize to drive the story, as well as maybe a moment in the film that you're particularly proud of.
Yeah, and as you asked that question, Marvin, I'm realizing I didn't answer the second part of the question, which is exactly that. It's like, so that was the next concern. That even though we are such a tight group in our collective and we know each other, we're still all individuals, and everybody has sort of a different style, and we hold it everybody has their own way of working, and so we wanted to come up with something where we could be as consistent visually as possible across 7 cinematographers, which is incredibly hard to do, and so and at the same time we wanted a visual language that feels really intimate. We looked at specifically Chelsea and Amanda looked at a feature narrative film called Son of Saul, which follows an inmate at a concentration camp for a few days, and it's a film that is shot very subjective on a 40mm lens, which is a prime lens, and you sort of experience them, and you never really go deep into focus. So like a lot of really cool stuff happens out of focus around them, but you're always with them, always here, and we love this perspective, sort of be 3/4 behind somebody, so we feel them. It's really their experience, and we took that as inspiration and wanted to be the camera to be as honest as it possibly can be, and that sort of dictated not having a zoom lens. We wanted the viewer to sort of experience that the camera is right there, that the camera is allowed, that translates into an honesty that you can't really achieve with a zoom lens, where you could be on a zoom lens, you could be somewhere at the end of the room and you zoom in and it feels more like you're observing something. But to get a close-up of somebody, when you have to really physically be close with them, is an entirely different feeling. And so we decided to give every cinematographer one lens, which was a 35mm prime lens. And with that, nobody was able to zoom. We all shot at the same aperture, an f2, so it's pretty wide open. And we talked a lot about that specific coverage, to be with them rather than looking at them. And you see that often in the speeches where often even sometimes two cameras, one is behind them, one is right here, and you just you get that immediate energy from those shots. Of course, it didn't work all the time, but I think it worked for a lot of it. And yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with visually how coherent it is, and obviously Jeff did an amazing job cutting it to what it is now. Yeah, I mean, and my personal favorite scene is because it was such an emotional scene when I shot it, was with Steven when he didn't win. There was so much beauty in that. And I had known him quite well by then and knew sort of the backstory of the complex life he lives at home with his mom, and it meant so much for him to get where he got, and then see him sort of releasing all this emotion and calling his mom was for me a really, really touching moment, and we all cried behind the camera. It was one of those really, really rare documentary moments where you get reminded, this is why I'm doing this. Yeah.
Good, thank you so much.
Our next question is from Boris.
Hello, Jeff. What are for you the best actual tools to be a good editor?
Well, I think the tools of writing are the critical rules of being a good documentary editor. I see editing as an extension of the writing process, if not the writing process itself. You're not using words, you're using footage. So having a good sense of story and a good understanding of human behavior, and being tuned into subtext in the way that a writer is, by looking at people's reactions, and having a sense of the experience of any of the subjects in a film, and finding the emotional heart. I think those are all really foundational and fundamental tools that I try to bring to the craft.
Great. Our next question is from Gary.
Hi. First, congratulations. I went to Boise State about 55 years ago in Sacramento, California. I don't remember it being at all like this, and I don't think it was sponsored by the American Legion. But it's an interesting double feature with what the Constitution means to me. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's an American Legion speech contest that a play was developed out of. It'd be a perfect double feature with this. While sequels are not one of my favorite things, it seems that Girls State is a natural follow-up, and has there been a conversation about that because they do sponsor Girls State. If you can't answer that, I have another question.
I mean, I've heard Jesse and Amanda speak about their desire to do Girls State and follow that program as well. I don't know if anything is specifically in the works, but it's certainly a lively idea.
Yeah, it would just be so interesting to see the contrast.
For sure.
But if I can ask the other thing, Thorsten, you mentioned how intimately you got to know Steven, and so each cinematographer presumably had a varying degree of developing this relationship with the subject they were following, and then you, Jeff, as the editor, having to look at all of those pieces that were brought to you. I'm interested from both of you about your feeling about those friendships, if you will, or those relationships that you developed as the cinematographers did, and then you as the editor trying to choose that, and then Thorsten, when you saw the finished film, how you felt about some of the stuff that you wished had been in there. Or maybe you're perfectly happy with the way it is.
I mean, that's the story of my life. That's always hard, and that's why that's a fascinating conversation to have. especially because I spent the first 10 years of my life editing and was on the other side of that. I sort of know both sides. I mean, I have to say upfront, the film that we have now was beyond my imagination. It's so wonderful, and I'm incredibly happy with it. But are there scenes that I was emotionally attached to, where I sat behind the camera crying, or with goosebumps, or emotionally riled up, or like touched? Yes, of course. And I'm sure, and we talked about this actually on a panel with all the cinematographers that we recently did with Able Cine. Everybody has those moments. Everybody has a favorite moment, and some of those moments didn't make it into the cut. But that's why we have this process, and such a wonderful editor. You have to let go of those moments. And during the editing process, I wasn't actively involved, but Jesse and Amanda periodically would share cuts with me, and I was able to talk to them and say, hey, listen, like, what happened to that scene? And they would say, well, listen, we played that scene 5 times. It was in the longer version of the cut. It was in the 3-hour version. It was in the 2-hour version, and we just had to make space, and we had to really go tell the story and get the story to where it needed to be. And so, yeah.
Yeah, well, we used to say those could all be on the DVD extras, but there are fewer and fewer DVDs coming out, so who knows?
That's right. Yeah.
Fewer DVDs and more movies. Don't need DVD extras anymore. You got Netflix.
That's right.
I don't know, the question, I mean, as it relates to relationships, obviously Thorsten and his team are creating direct personal relationships, and my relationship is with, the two-dimensional versions of themselves that were captured within that week. So it's limited, all right? I don't really get to know them as people until we meet, hopefully at a festival later down the road, which is another very strange experience. But I form a relationship in as much that I'm in touch with how I feel about their behavior and about what they say, and how Renee inspires me with his speech, and Stephen inspires me with his hope, and Ben, as a character in the film, infuriated me and scared me, and Robert made me laugh. I have my own sort of one-directional relationship with them. They don't know me, obviously, so it's not a two-way thing. But I'm mindful that, what you see on screen is just one version and one moment of time in their lives, and they're all actually complex, rich young men. In a lot of different ways. So hopefully we represented them honestly, but it's also, it's a real treat to actually get to know. I haven't met all of them, but I got to meet Ben and Stephen and Renee at Sundance, which is always a real treat to sort of flesh out the third dimension, which is the actual person, while surprising them, because I have no idea who I am. And I've spent a year of my life sort of psychoanalyzing each of them.
Great. Our next question comes from Marvin.
Boy State has got lots of real, raw, and true emotions captured by the different cameras. These questions are for Jeff. First question, how did you decide, or what was the most difficult cut that you have to make? And number 2, were there any visual effects involved in the final cut of your film?
No visual effects. We enhanced some screens that were a little hard to pick up on the camera. We did some visual enhancing, but there were no visual effects that I can remember. It wasn't really part of the cinematic language of the film. In terms of the first question was scenes that were
what was
hard
the most difficult cut that you have to make, Jeff?
What do you mean, like scene that we had to lose, or the most difficult scene to construct?
To compress, or to lose, or to take away?
A lot of, I feel like it was very long. It was a very long sort of assembly before I got it. I came on after somebody had done a pretty large assembly. And it was fairly, I don't want to say easy, but it was fairly clear how to sort of take the weight out of the film in just terms of a lot of repetition, get it down to the essence of the characters and the story. And so I didn't necessarily, there's not anything, I don't look back and regret having to lose anything in particular. I really feel good about the final edit. I think the thing that was the most tricky in the process was figuring out how to balance the governor's race, the plot, if you will, with the larger ideas of what these different parties were debating, like their policy platforms, right? So there's the governor's race, and then there's the party politics, and the two don't necessarily intersect, in a way that like is a cause and effect way. So we wanted to keep these big ideas of civil discourse alive. And we wanted to know what was being debated and what the kids were interested in terms of policy. But it didn't necessarily drive the story forward. So I think one of the biggest editorial challenges was sort of how to keep the film as more than just a competition film, how to make it smart, if you will, while not losing the momentum of the governor race itself, and how to integrate characters like Renee and Ben, who aren't running, at a certain point, they're no longer running for an office, they're just leading a party, and keep them woven into the fabric of the principal storyline. I think that was really the biggest challenge, and what we went back and forth on, adding scenes, removing them, trying them in different places, removing them again, moving the pieces around, was mostly to create that balance.
Thank you.
And our last question is from Gerald.
I'm just wondering about if there were any surprises or challenges that you had to face during the course of filming. This is maybe more on the cinematography side, or where you were able to get what you wanted. I'm just wondering about that, how you've met any surprises that came during the course of filming.
I mean, what were the surprises? One of the things we realized very fast, there was a steep learning curve sort of after the first day. It was our idea that we could have one cinematographer assigned to one subject and have camera mic and a lavalier microphone pick up the sound. We realized fast that that wasn't possible. So we had to actually go and find every sound guy all over, and woman all over Austin, because there's 1,200 kids, conversations happening in the middle of like a lunch break, where you had a room full of like 800 kids being loud and rowdy, and you still needed to. So that was something where we had to pivot very fast. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I don't think there were any big surprises, other than we were just incredibly happy by the access we had. We didn't know until it was actually happening. Like, are they actually going to let us in? Are they going to shut us out at some point? Can we be on the stages? And it was wonderful to just feel this acceptance. Like, the cameras were there from the first moment, and everybody sort of accepted them. Yeah, I can't think of any other big surprises.
Good.